Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. It's a bit of a more depressing edition of Kindred Skulls this week, given the Vikings' elimination from the playoffs at the hands of the New York Giants, who, honestly, some people are talking him up, some people are talking up Daniel Jones very highly. I don't think that Daniel Jones really played all that well in this. I mean, I think Daniel Jones played pretty well in this game. I don't think it means Daniel Jones is a good quarterback, and that's because our defense was a disaster, Nick.
Yeah, this is the emergency pod version of Kindred Skulls because the Vikings literally just announced as we were getting ready to tape that the Vikings would be relieving defensive coordinator Ed Donatell of his duties, i.e., in less kind terms, they fired him. So when you watch the tape, when you grind the All-22 of this pathetic loss, it's not hard to see why. I was kind of on the fence, and then when you watch what they did in this game, and we will get into it in excruciating detail, but like beating the Vikings with the same kind of switch releases that they beat you with like 3 weeks ago, like not having an answer for the basic stuff that they already beat you with, like you should be ready for this stuff. I can understand defensively, Wink Martindale mixed a lot of things up, and I can understand if like Kevin O'Connell got taken off track by that. Luckily, he didn't, but like the Vikings were screwing up so many basic things, and like we're not talking about screwing things up in September. We're talking about like screwing up basic coverage pass-offs not just a year later, but in the postseason against routes and combinations you already saw like less than a month ago. So not to get too worked up about it, but man, this was some of the roughest defensive tape I've had to grind, and that includes watching Shamar Stephen be the best defensive lineman on Zimmer's defense 2 years ago. That includes a lot of really bad blowout loss, but this was just inexcusably bad. So I guess the Vikings said the same thing. Do you want to, Matt, just dive into what went wrong?
Yeah, and let's set the stage a little bit here. As Nick mentioned, Ed Donatell was fired like less than half an hour ago. In the pre-show, I hadn't even been paying attention to Twitter, so Nick was the one who informed me of that. But I think honestly, and I don't like to say this about somebody, like he deserved it, right? Like, I don't think he did a good job as a defensive coordinator and defensive play caller for the Minnesota Vikings. You mentioned, this is some of the roughest defensive tape we've had to watch. The Vikings had their worst defensive season over the past 3 years. I would say this year, if you look at not only the yardage metrics or the points metrics, which it's in line with what happened in 2020 and 2021 under Mike Zimmer, but also the advanced metrics are worse than anything we saw in those 2 seasons under Mike Zimmer. So, defensive EPA per play and DVOA in particular are worse than what we saw under Mike Zimmer. And that's when the Vikings had a ton of injuries, especially up front, and couldn't get a pass rush on anybody for the latter half of the 2020 season and the latter half of the 2021 season. Like, Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith were healthy. They were getting pressure. They were playing at a high level, and the secondary and the coverage just constantly busted, which I think it is appropriate for us to roll into the Giants game now, because it's a microcosm of how the team didn't adjust throughout the course of the season, and also just didn't have their basic rules down right. And if we jump into the game, right, I think we could go back to this pod that we had last week, right? We had a pod where we previewed it, and we primarily made it a preview of this Giants game, and I had a number of bullet points identified, right, for the Vikings to take care of. Number one, I said they had to shore up their pass rush layering. They absolutely did not do this. Daniel Jones scrambled all over the Minnesota Vikings. He had wide open lanes to run through in the pocket. That's a failure on the front four. That's a failure on the coaching of the front four and the decisions for pass rush layering. I mentioned switch releases, and I mentioned in-breaking routes versus man, and particularly in-breaking routes versus stack man when it's stack releases. When the Vikings went to man against stack releases, the second touchdown in this game was man coverage off of a stack release, and they couldn't solve the breakup. I also said that the Giants really love to run this play where they were in 21 personnel, they had jet motion, and they, just ran split zone off of that in the first game. I was like, they'll probably build off that. Guess what? They built off it, and they did it like 3 times. They had a pitch to Barkley, and that was the first touchdown where Barkley got in for a touchdown on a pitch off of motion. It wasn't split zone. It was kind of like a sweep action off of that motion, like a counter to that. But, if I can identify these things on the podcast and I'm like, look, these are items like 1, 2, and 3 that we need to take care of that we failed against in week 16. You should be able to do something about that as an NFL defensive coordinator. Like, yeah, the other guys executed well and they had a good game plan and they get paid too, but like, you get paid to do this job. And, the Vikings just did not do it successfully. So that's kind of just the general overview I have and my anguish with this, or my angst with this going through the defensive tape. It's like, this is stuff that I think was easily identifiable previously. Do you have anything to add there real quick? Just like as an overarching view, and then we'll get into maybe some specific plays.
No, I mean, the credit Matt for catching all this stuff and finding things that Ed Donatel apparently could not. We were saying this, or I was joking around earlier this week with you, Matt, that like, you were proven to be the smartest member of Kindred Skulls this past week after I got one wrong on the Inside Zone versus Duo game on Twitter. Meanwhile, Matt Waldman, great shout out to him for all his great work he does, but he was agreeing with your Dalvin Cook takes. So just another reminder to everyone that of the two of us, Matt's the smarter one. But yeah, I mean, you do have to tip your cap to the Giants coaching staff, and this is what we said, this is what made me afraid, was like Daboll and Kafka are so good at what they do, and the Vikings defense has so many weak points that can be easily exploited. But they didn't have to make it this easy for the Giants. They didn't have to not even have the Giants, I'm sure, had counters ready for the counters, but they never had to go to that step on the chessboard. They didn't have to think 10 moves ahead, because they only need to think one move ahead, and that was enough for the Vikings. Very, very basic stuff. How many times have we seen the Vikings, Chandon Sullivan and Eric Kendrick struggle to pass off when there's a fast 3 to the strong side of a play or something? And when a running back sprints out to the flat pre-snap and you're not sure if that should be the linebacker covering that or the nickel covering that, and they screwed that up in this game multiple times, and it's just very basic stuff that they screwed up all year long, and come into the playoffs and they're still screwing it up. In a win or go home game, it's pretty inexcusable. So you can feel we're getting a little worked up over this, but that's why people lose jobs in these situations, because if guys behind a laptop like Matt and I can figure this out, the Vikings should have been able to figure it out too. It's like I said, it's just inexcusable. So basic mistakes made this. They made Daniel Jones look like Lamar Jackson combined with Joe Burrow. It's just that should not be happening. So.
Yeah, and Nick, I think one of the players that was at the center of those issues in coverage a lot of times in this game was Chandon Sullivan. One thing I noticed with him in this game is he constantly either, how corners sometimes play too far off in coverage, right? Especially on the outside. This was a thing for Cameron Dantzler for a very long time, and they let up just free yards underneath. Chandon Sullivan will hedge too far, either inside leverage or outside leverage, and let up a bunch of yards in either direction. Notable, the second play of the game, or the first play of the game after the Giants set themselves back with a holding penalty, right? Chandon Sullivan plays with outside leverage. The Giants release a running back as a fast 3, and Eric Kendricks goes to chase that. That means that Chandon Sullivan doesn't have inside help on a slant. The slant goes for 13 yards. The Giants convert for a first down on the next play. If you get a stop there, or you get a short gain there, you could really reset what the Giants' play call is. You could get a 3 and out on the first drive of the game, right? Because they made a mistake early on, and that could be a really good stepping point moving forward. Instead, on the Giants' first 3 drives, they scored 17 points, right? And you flip that over. There was another issue where it was a 3rd down and short. It's kind of it's a zone underneath between Chandon Sullivan and Duke Shelley. So I think it was Isaiah Hodgins sat in the hole in the zone. Neither Shelley nor Sullivan closed quickly enough on it, and he's just barely able to back himself over the line, get that extra yard he needs on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, or whatever to get the first down. When you're playing sticks coverage like that, you need to prevent anybody who's catching the ball short of the first down from getting a first down after the catch. That's your primary goal. And when you have 2 defenders there converging at the same time, they should do it in time so the player is not able to get past the sticks. That's just kind of basic fundamental stuff that defenses have to do and have to know how to prepare for and play against, and the Vikings weren't able to do that. I think Chandon Sullivan was a pretty big part of that. Obviously, he's an impending free agent. We're not going to go over, free agents and stuff in this show. That'll be a future show, but he is definitely not somebody I want back. You flip over, so Chandon Sullivan was the first thing, right? And then The third drive the Giants had, they ran 20 plays. They ran like 11 minutes or something off the clock. It really limited the number of possessions in the game. And the Giants had a number of long drives. The Vikings had a few long drives on their end, too, that really limited the number of possessions. And I think that's something we'll talk about when we get to the offense. But Daniel Jones scrambling, there was a series on that drive where he had 4 scrambles out of 5 dropbacks. And the Vikings, stopped him short of a first down on one of them, but he picked up the first down on a scramble on the very next play, right? Like, it wasn't like they did some sort of amazing job containing him. No, they just didn't allow him to run for 14 yards. They only allowed him to run for 7 yards, right? And the issue here, and the issue on the vast majority of the plays, was Daniel Jones was able to hit the top of his drop, see that he didn't like his first read, and this is something that Josh Allen did under Brian Daboll, right? You hit the top of your drop, you don't like your first read, and you get out and go. And what the hole he was exploiting specifically was to the side of the double team in pass protection on the offense. So there's a double team on the defensive tackle. It really varied who it was. It was Dalvin Tomlinson. It was Jonathan Bullard. It was a couple different people. It was Tonga. And on that side of the field, the Vikings edge rusher, the defensive end, whether it was Hunter or Patrick Jones, or kind of depending on who it was, would go up the field. And the way you layer pass rush, at least I have a very basic understanding of this, right, is for the defensive ends, you want one to go up the field and run the arc, and you want one to go up, threaten, and then convert speed to power and kind of come underneath in case the quarterback tries to climb up in the pocket. That second guy can get him when he comes underneath. That guy who runs speed around the edge, though, the defensive tackle needs to, because that'll create a gap, right? It makes the defensive end and the offensive tackle move very far back into the pocket. Not only does the defensive tackle need to compress the pocket, but they also need to close that open gap if the quarterback tries to run through it. And the Vikings defensive tackles were not doing a very good job of this throughout the game. They did, honestly, a better job of it in week 16 against the Giants, but in this game, they were just terrible at it. I mean, that's why Daniel Jones scrambled, 8 times for 70-something yards or something like that. Like, on designed runs, he wasn't particularly effective. On scrambles, he was deadly, and he kind of killed the Vikings. So that's another thing I wanted to get out there. And then the third thing I wanted to talk about, which I alluded to earlier, was just that second touchdown where you had the Giants short motion into a stack formation. The Vikings had kind of man coverage. So I think it was Harrison Smith who has an underneath route. There's a linebacker to that side, I think Jordan Hicks, and he kind of brackets the underneath route with Harrison Smith. But Patrick Peterson, who's somewhat responding to the short motion, he has got outside leverage, and he's kind of beat inside, right? When you're that far outside the corner against a stack release, that gives the guy an extra couple yards to make something happen. Patrick Peterson isn't able to cross the face. Like, there needs to be a different coverage adjustment so you can hedge against that post route. It's kind of like a skinny post route or whatever that ended up being a 14-yard touchdown in the red zone. Like, you just can't allow that kind of free access for a touchdown in that scenario. Anything you want to touch on in addition to that, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, the Patrick Peterson touchdown is particularly frustrating because they did it to us. They did a ton of those, motion to a stack so that they could get switch releases and basically win easy inside leverage. I mean, we talked about that Christmas game. They beat us over and over with these little skinny posts. They just kept doing it. It was really frustrating to see them literally give up a big touchdown off exactly that, just like an easy gimme. And that's another thing about like Daniel Jones played well. I don't want to denigrate him at all, but the Vikings made it so easy for him. Literally, he didn't have to air it out. He didn't have to pitch it. It was just a lot of this guy has leverage. This guy is open. I'm gonna throw it to him, and he's got yards of space because Chan and Sullivan is 2 yards behind him in trail. So it was just. I mean, part of that is talent, but also part of that is this is the defense you've chosen to build, and these are the parts you chose to build it out of. You need to be able to do something other than having a Mickey Mouse spot drop defense that doesn't even that third down conversion they gave up on third. What are Duke Shelley and Chan Sullivan doing? Literally, the wide receiver just sits in between them, and they just sit there and give up the first down completion on third down. Why do you even drop to a spot if you're just going to give up these easy completions? So, the whole Donatel defense is not supposed to be or the Fangio defense is not supposed to be just a high school version of a spot. Like I'm just gonna here's my
Yeah.
landmark and I'll just stay here forever. Like you're supposed to match with guys, and so often we're seeing guys just like float in no man's land. Like we dedicate all this extra numbers into coverage, but why would you? Why does it matter if you're just going to sit there and be static and not like respond to the routes being run in front of you? So it's stuff like that, just giving up easy completions. Whether it was, with the Patrick Peterson touchdown, that second touchdown, it was like matching, but in a way that like you should have had a response to, or whether it was just like spot drop coverages where they just like let passes sail over them. I mean, that was kind of the story of the season. How many times the linebackers just sit there
Mm-hmm.
underneath in no man's land and not able to interrupt the quarterback's passing lanes because they're just sitting there doing nothing. You dedicate these extra men in coverage, but they don't do anything when you just like have them just sit there. And against how good the NFL is and how good passers are and how good passing coordinators and play callers are now, you can't just like have guys just sit there like it's the 1980s and we're just gonna like drop back to our landmarks and run cover two all day. So it's I guess I don't have any new insights, but I think the ones you're hammering home are right, and they're ones that you alluded to before and we talked about before. So to see them come back and to see the Vikings so unpantsed, basically having no answer for things that we all knew were coming, just supremely disappointing. That's a tough way for the season to end on a very preventable number of mistakes like these.
Yeah, and one final thing I want to throw out here on the defensive side is like the first time I really saw them play man coverage and blitz in the third quarter. I think it was the first drive that the Giants actually failed on. They got a sack. Like literally, it was a third down. They played man coverage. They blitzed, they blitzed Kendricks, and it ended up being a sack. Right? They had some blitzes early in the game, right, where they rush their 5 down players, which is technically a blitz because they're rushing 5 guys. But that's not really, like, I don't consider that a blitz in the same way as you're mugging up the line of scrimmage and you're blitzing the linebacker. Like, Kendricks got a free rush against Saquon Barkley. It was a one-on-one against Saquon Barkley. He beat him pretty handily. And Danielle Hunter, because Daniel Jones tried to move a little bit, actually had the time where he just completely ran around Evan Neal. Like, it's not like Danielle Hunter wasn't winning pass rush reps in this game. It's that Daniel Jones was either able to climb up and escape the pocket immediately because there was nothing in his face, or he was able to get the ball out immediately because the coverage is broken down so badly. And I just wish that we would have seen, like, the Vikings played a ton of man coverage against the Giants in week 16, and it wasn't the most successful, right? There were definitely reps where they lost because their guys couldn't hold up at man. But I think when it's not working so clearly and obviously through the first 2 drives and even that third drive, like, you got to switch it up in the course of those drives rather than coming back in the third quarter and trying to do that. So that was definitely, something that's, again, disappointment to see, like, the lack of variety and the lack of in-game adjustments and the lack of, just tailoring your game plan to your opponent to try to stop Daniel Jones and this passing offense, which, again, doesn't have great wide receivers. I actually have really liked the play I've seen from Isaiah Hodgins in the past in both of these games. Like, I think he might actually be a legit NFL wide receiver. Like, he might be legit pretty good just based on how he played in these games, especially with his ability to win the ball, catching through contact. But outside of that, man, like, it's just inexcusable to let these Giants receivers run all over you. And I bet we'll see this week, when you have an Eagles defense that actually has talent and is well coached, they're kind of going to put the clamps on those receivers. So it's just kind of a disappointing end to the season. And, pretty bitter there. And that's kind of all the ranting I have on the defense. Unless you have anything else, Nick, do you want to go over to the offense?
Maybe just put a bow on it. Like the whole philosophy behind this fan style defense. Kevin O'Connell always talks about winning the first second of those reps, like disguising things, making everything look the same so that you win the first second or whatever. But like in reality, that's not what Donatel's defense was, because it was never hard to figure out what they were doing. You just read one safety, and you can immediately know, okay, they're moving to one of their cover 3 things. Oh, he's in quarters technique. They're playing quarters to this half of the field or whatever. Oh, he's moving back. He's dropping back to his cover 2 landmark. It's never hard to figure out what the Vikings are doing on defense. Like schematically, they were just very predictable, and that's what made it so like it's frustrating. Like they didn't play much man coverage. They didn't blitz much. They didn't put a spy on Daniel Jones. all things that I kind of figured like they would mix things up, but they didn't mix things up, and they weren't able to make it. If you're so predictable, you're not winning that first half of the rep. You're making it very easy, and that's like what you were talking about. Like it was just choose what side. Daniel Jones was just, I'm going to choose to read this side of the field. I'm going to make half field reads all day, and if my first guy isn't open, I'm going to like try and break out, see if I can scramble for something. And it was just like it was a dink and dunk offense done very very like they beat this Vikings defense got out schemed with like a very basic stuff. Like that's not to say that Dable and Kafka didn't have like really great wrinkles on top of everything, but like a lot of this stuff should have been preventable for an NFL caliber defense and defensive coordinator, and that's apparently not what the Vikings had. So just an egregiously bad defensive performance all around. Luckily, the offense, there was a lot of good stuff in there, so maybe we can dive into that and salvage something of the tape.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I thought the offense played very well in this game. And there was, two big moments that I think fans remember, right? And that's obviously the 3rd and 1 call that was the throwback to Kirk, and then the final play of the game. We'll dive into those a little bit later, but I want to kind of talk about the positives first, because there were a ton of positives. First of all, you look at what the Vikings did throughout the course of the game. They only had 8 drives on offense. Now, that's not like impossible. There was the game, I don't know if you remember, in 2020 against the Packers, where they won 28-21. I think they scored touchdowns on their first 4 drives, and they literally only had 2 drives in the first half because both teams went back and forth with really, really long drives. They ended up with 7 drives in that game, right? They ended up with 8 drives in this game. So it's another one of those where teams are, going up and down the field, and they're taking a very long time to do it. We saw on the opening drive, I thought the Vikings came out with a very good script to attack the Giants defense. And people have talked a lot about how the Giants, Wink Martindale totally changed his approach, right? He didn't blitz. He played 2 high safeties. He focused on Justin Jefferson. Well, guess what? 8 drives, 24 points. That's 3 points per drive. That's better than any offense over the course of the entire season, right? So obviously individual games you'll have much better performances, but on average, if you're scoring 3 points per drive, you're very likely to win that football game, right? Like I think that the Vikings offensive performance was easily good enough. It was very good, and it was easily good enough to win this football game. Obviously they got Justin Jefferson involved heavily and early. What I noticed was that the Giants defense, when they were playing off coverage against Justin Jefferson, the Vikings threw the ball to him instantly, right? It was a quick slant, it was a quick out, something like that, to get 7-8 yards to get him going. He won on a dig route over the middle. The run game wasn't great. It got mixed in there. The play action game was very good. Obviously, once the Giants started to take away Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson became the target of the Vikings passing game, and it just makes the trade look better and better every time TJ Hawkinson gets more targets. He had 120 plus yards in this game, and the Giants really had no answer to him. It was like the Vikings were fine with the Giants taking away Justin Jefferson because they were hitting Hawkinson over and over and over again. And if you look at their drive log, right, the first drive, they score a touchdown. Obviously, you cannot complain about that. The second drive, they have, the quirky situation where this was the second drive, right, where they had the 3rd and 1 throwback. And that situation, too, I want to talk about a little bit, because I think the refs handled it by the rulebook, but I think the rulebook needs to be fixed in this specific instance when they're doing these quick reviews. Because what happened here, right, is the Vikings thought they had a first down. The refs ruled it a first down on the field. And then the NFL now has this, like, the booth in New York can call, like, a quick review where they change the ruling of the play if it's obviously and clearly wrong and easy to overturn. The problem is, when the refs stopped play, the Vikings were lined up at the line of scrimmage, and there were 29 seconds left on the play clock, right? So the Vikings had a play called for 1st and 10, were lined up, and then the refs changed the ruling. The play clock's at 29 seconds. They have it sit there. They let the Vikings re-huddle, but the Vikings now, instead of having 40 seconds to call a play, right, for Kevin O'Connell, he has 29 seconds, and it's 3rd and 1. And I think he kind of went with something, and he said after the game he didn't feel good about it. I don't know why you install the play or have it as something that's with potential to be called. I don't know who ends up calling that play at that point if you don't feel good about it on 3rd and 1. Maybe that's a retrospective, like, yeah, that was a very stupid idea. I thought it was good at the time, but You got 29 seconds instead of the normal 40 seconds. You have to get in a 3rd and 1 play call. You have to change it. You have to communicate, make sure everybody gets it. And I think that caused a little bit of a crunch, right? And that's a situation where, if you have a booth review, you have that timeout. It takes so long. You can discuss, hey, this is what we're going to do if it's 3rd and 1. This is what we're going to do if it's 1st and 10, right? And at that point, they reset the play clock to 25 seconds. But if you know what you're doing going into that 25 seconds, it's a lot easier to run a play than it is to call a play, get everybody on the same page, and run it. So that was just a little bit there that I thought, the NFL, I think they did it by the rule book, but they need to fix that moving forward if they're going to do these quick reviews and just kind of. I like the fact that it speeds the game up and we don't have to go through these lengthy reviews, but I think we need to do something different on that. But sorry, that was a huge sidetrack, right? So we punt on that. We have another one where Irv Smith drops his 2nd and 3. It leads to a 3rd down failure on the next play. Then we score a touchdown. Then we score another touchdown. Then we kick a field goal. And then, it's a quick 3-and-out where we ended up getting sacked on the first play and the final drive in the game. And those are all the opportunities the Vikings have. Like, the offense ran great, I thought. It's just they lacked the opportunities to score more points. And the defense played so poorly on the flip side of that the Giants were able to score more points than them in still a very limited number of drives.
Yeah, I don't want to harp on that 3rd down play call too much, but because of what you mentioned, they kind of got screwed over with the play clock. But like, I don't understand how that play call comes up on the whiteboard and nobody like points out that like this is ridiculous, like this is not going to work, and like it doesn't even if you drew that up, like even like those reverse screens, like you're counting on too many things to not go wrong for this to work. And so a throwback pass to Cousins, and I do want to say like. It's one thing if it's a jet sweep with an option for Jefferson to throw it downfield to Osborne or whoever the receiver is. In this case, it was Osborne, who, by the way, was open. I feel like Jefferson should have thrown it downfield to Osborne, but instead he rips it back to Cousins without even looking downfield. So I feel like it was a predetermined like reverse screen to Kirk Cousins as your quarterback. That's just stupid play calling. I'm sorry. That wouldn't even look good on a whiteboard. I don't know how like Wes Phillips doesn't like raise his hand and say like actually maybe we should take this one off the play call sheet.
Yeah.
Because it's but again, you pointed out like 3 points per drive. That's a better day than the best offense in the like. If that's an average day in the office for the Chiefs or something, or even better than that. So like it's a really good offensive performance. But yeah, these the initial play calls were bad. I want to say a lot of individual players played well. DJ Hawkinson taking the game over, I thought was really interesting because the Vikings kind of came out and every time they were playing off coverage on Justin Jefferson, it was just like, okay, we'll take a quick out with JJ and see if he can get anything after the catch, and set up like a 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3, and so Jefferson ate a lot of quick, easy passes. And really, the Giants, I think, Wink's whole plan this game was rush with 7 or rush with 4. Drop 7 back, and sometimes 8 back, and kind of trust Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence to get home, especially Dexter Lawrence, and use a lot of twists and stunts up front because Bradbury and Ed Ingram couldn't really handle that, and Ezra Cleveland. And I feel like that was actually a good call. They didn't really need to dedicate resources to blitz coverages. The problem, I think, for Wink is that like Cousins is so good at like just just sort of immediately figuring out what you're trying to do with your zone coverage and immediately knowing where to go with the ball. And even if pass rush gets home, he did a very good job. He does a very good job trying to know where to go with the ball. But like, even saying on top of that of like how this would have worked like ex ante, like looking at how Cousins performed, like this was I think Cousins' best game in years, not just of this year, but in years. He was so good. And it's such a shame that it all the discourse goes down to that last fourth and 8 call. Because like Cousins was there. I mean, there aren't like highlight reel plays to go over, but there's just so many individual things that were like just individually like this is difficult quarterbacking to do. And I know it's only a 5-yard gain or whatever, but like Dexter Lawrence in his face throwing off his back foot, like doing a play action drop back, not being able to hit the back foot of his drop because pressure is already arriving, and being able to sort of twist and get the ball out to his hot read, or hitting guys perfectly in stride downfield. Or there were a lot of those corner shots. They ran those like high lows, or like the fake screen with the T.J. Hawkinson streaking downfield. They had another one with Adam Thielen, and like those passes were just like picture perfect. So like so many things that Cousins did in this game The command at the line of scrimmage, the accuracy was there. Like he was single-handedly keeping the Vikings in this game while being pressured on 44% of his dropbacks. So we have another one of these Vikings playoff games where the offensive line is just completely shredded against a really good playoff defensive line. But this time around, Kirk Cousins kept them in the game, and he kept scoring drive after drive after drive. And it's such a shame that like at the end everybody was just like, well, why did he check it down on fourth down? Well, because no, I mean we'll get into this. Nobody was open, and was it dumb to throw to T.J. Hawkinson? Yeah, you could throw up a 50-50 ball to Justin Jefferson, who's got a safety over the top and has a guy behind him in trailer. You could throw it to Osborne and work back to the dig on the other side. Cousins is starting off working on the high low between Jefferson running a corner route and Hawkinson running out to the flat. I don't like the offensive design because Hawkins had to stay into chip and then he releases out, and so he's like, I think it was a choice route, and I don't really think he set himself up to like escape from coverage. But like we've seen Hawkinson, Hawkinson's good after the catch. We've seen him break tackles and make it downfield. And Cousins said after the game like I don't feel bad about that one necessarily because I just felt like I had to get rid of the ball before I couldn't take a sack on fourth down. At the same time, I understand people saying like, well, throwing it to somebody who's covered and is about to get tackled wrapped up is not a great decision compared to throwing it downfield, throwing a 50-50 ball to Justin Jefferson. I think that throw to Justin Jefferson would have been worse than a 50-50 ball, probably like a 25-75 ball, but I'd probably take the Jefferson throw over Hawkinson. In an ideal world, you work back to the dig because I feel like a well-placed ball to Osborne there could have had a good chance of being brought down. But I mean, that's you're talking about getting to your third read when Dexter Lawrence is immediately destroying Garrett Bradbury off the snap. So I skipped ahead a little bit to that last play of the game, Matt. But I don't know if you have any other.
No, yeah. Let's talk about that because that's the big ticket item, right? Everybody wants to talk about. I mean, Kirk said after the game like he wanted to have the throw on third down back more so than the throw on fourth down. I think that's reasonable. Like KJ Osborne was more open on third down, I think, than he was on fourth down. I think the way he ran that route would have allowed the defender to undercut it, which kind of allowed the defender to undercut it on the previous route as well. But if Kirk had led him, there was more space there, I think, than there was in the second option. I understand, you want to throw the ball past the sticks. And I think the Vikings in general all season and Kirk Cousins in general all season has actually done a very good job of doing that on the third and long situations, on the third and medium situations where he's not taking checkdowns that end up getting tackled short, which was a complaint we've had for him for years, right? I think he changed that quite a bit this season compared to previous seasons. In this case, like there are some instances, I think, on the offensive side of the ball and in the Dolphins Bills game earlier, we saw a 4th and 8 converted when it was checked down to a running back who broke a tackle and got a first down. All TJ Hawkinson needs to do is break one tackle. Now, I'm not saying that's easy, but TJ Hawkinson was breaking tackles in this game. Like, he was actually playing really well after the catch. So, if your option is a 25% ball to Justin Jefferson, or if you have the faith in TJ Hawkinson to win on an option route, right, which he didn't do, right? So there's that. But I don't think Kirk is necessarily saying, okay, TJ isn't going to create any separation at all when he winds up to throw this football, right? He's kind of throwing it at TJ Hawkinson's break. He's making sure he's reading the same leverage that TJ Hawkinson is, and it's an option route, right? So, you at some point you got to trust your guys to win, and the guys downfield didn't really win. Like Adam Thielen wasn't open. KJ Osborne was the most open, but Justin Jefferson wasn't open either. So you can pray for another miracle to Justin Jefferson. I understand wanting to go that route, right? He's done it so often, it feels like this season, that I'm totally fine with going that route. But, I don't despise the quote unquote check down here. Like, it's unfortunate that I think this is blemishing the game that Kirk Cousins had. And I'm not like a Kirk Cousins apologist, right? We've been on this podcast before where I've said I wanted the Vikings to trade Kirk Cousins with the new regime, right? I didn't think Kirk Cousins would elevate his game to the level that he has this season. And I really do think he's elevated his game to another level and has played with the quieted mind, or whatever you want to call it. Because you look in this game, he's making throws that require him to step into them over the middle of the field with anticipation into tight windows to receivers, with pressure in his face. Like, those are crazy difficult throws to make, and Kirk Cousins is doing it, and he doesn't get hurt taking all these hits. I mean, that's kind of and that's kind of a luck thing, I think, to some extent, but it's an underrated aspect that he's been able to take so many hits. I think he was the most hit quarterback in the NFL this year. Doesn't take a single injury, whether he's learned how to fall the right way or he's just gotten a little bit lucky with his, chest protection or something there. I don't know what the cause of that is, but it's just really impressive, his ability to stand in and make these throws over the middle in this game. I think that really, stood out to me from Kirk.
Yeah, as somebody who's been, it's funny. Like, I feel like I was in the minority of Vikings fans who wanted Kirk to be extended for the past few years. Like, I was probably among like the film nerds, like one of the more pro Kirk folks. And then this year, I've been pretty disappointed by Kirk's tape and have been increasingly more move on from Kirk. But this was kind of a watershed game for me because as I continued to watch play after playing the All-22, like this is the Kirk Cousins I've always dreamed of. Like this is the Kirk who is decisive with the ball, knows where he's going with it, is pushing the ball downfield, is throwing it with the elite accuracy that was so spotty for most of the year. He was just put together a complete game. The accuracy, the decisiveness, the aggression, the ability to play under pressure in lots of ways that we haven't seen from him in the years past. Pressure up the middle, and he was able to either sidestep pressure or get away from it or anticipate it and accelerate his drop back, which is a very difficult thing to do because like you're sort of coached to just be like robotic with like I'm going to take my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 step drop and then I'm going to scan the field. Kirk instead knows how to just sort of abandon the robot technique and be like, okay, 1, 2, 3, there's Dexter Lawrence. I'm going to immediately throw the ball off my back foot so that this has a chance. And he's getting the ball out to Irv Smith in the flat. And like, yeah, maybe that's like an easy throw, but like these are the sorts of plays that like Kirk in the past would turtle up and shell up under pressure and not be able to sustain drives. And this was the game where even if you take, the defense was doing everything it could to take away the explosives, to take away Justin Jefferson after they got a lot of those gimmies early on. They were just gonna, double him with a safety or whatever. And Cousins was able to say all day like, okay, we'll beat you. We'll hit these corner shots to Adam Thielen. We're gonna feed TJ Hawkinson over and over. And Hawkinson, a big reason Hawkinson was able to get so much yak is because a lot of those balls were just picture perfect right in front of Hawkinson, leading him to the ball. So, one game isn't enough to completely sway my opinion of a player. But like, if this is the kind of Kirk Cousins that we can look forward to as he's gotten more comfortable with what Kevin O'Connell's asking of him and in the scheme, then like, yeah, I'm totally on board. Extend this version of Kirk Cousins. You can win Super Bowls with this version of Kirk Cousins. So, it's like I said, it's disappointing that like it ends on a play that everybody dunks on Cousins for checking it down on 4th down. But like the overall game, like this is the kind of game that if you told me this is how Kirk was going to play, I would have said that's the kind of Kirk Cousins that goes on a Super Bowl run and wins you a ring. So really encouraging stuff. Kirk actually finishes the year wind up after a lot of like mediocrity, finishes the year as the 10th best quarterback by Pro Football Focus and like 15th best by EPA per play. You can build off that, definitely. And so that, this one playoff game, it's funny. I feel like a lot of people, playoff games are where quarterbacks' kind of reputation and their legacy are built. And I feel like a lot of people will only look at that last game to build their reputation of Kirk. But for me, this was a game that I feel like this one made me a lot more kind of changed my mind, I guess, a little bit in terms of where I think they need to go next with Kirk. So really, lots of really encouraging stuff, as disappointing as the defense was. So
yeah, and for me on Kirk, just to fully flesh out my thoughts here, I think, what you said there, where Kirk is doing things that past Kirk would not have done. And I think we saw that over the course of the season where Kirk was playing differently in those areas where it didn't seem like he had the situational awareness earlier, right? When he's under pressure to kind of abort it and make a quick throw or to try to make something happen or to convert those 3rd and longs, to be aggressive on 3rd down rather than just going through his reads 1, 2, 3 and checking the ball down or something like that. Like it seemed like he had improved on that over the course of the season, and the stuff he was previously really good at, he had gotten a lot worse. Now he did the normal stuff great in this game, and the situational stuff, I thought it was really good. It is unfortunate that, with that ending play, the narrative has become, oh, it's the same old Kirk again, right? Where I think Kirk played kind of like a fundamentally different quarterback this entire season, and it showed early on. I think it showed in the Vikings record, right? I think it showed in the clutchness that we had. I think a decent portion of that can be ascribed to Kirk Cousins, and I know that's not like a very analytics friendly thing, or like it's not easy to describe that with the data. And he actually had a worse year by basically all of the data that we have than he had previously. But I think from a film perspective and from a football player perspective, Kirk Cousins had a better season. So what I real quick, I want to hit on Dalvin Cook. You know, I tweeted out a thing because of rush yards over expected, which is a next gen stats stat, said that Dalvin Cook had like minus 42 RYOE or something, which is ridiculous because he had 60 yards rushing on 15 attempts. So they're asking him to have like, you know, what is that, like 7 or 8 yards or per attempt or something like that. Like, no running back, first of all, gets that amount of yardage per attempt without busting a big gain. But second of all, like, I think if you watch the plays, and I posted a compilation of all the 15 plays, like, there were definitely a couple decisions where Dalvin can get more yards, or if he makes a player miss, he's able to run through this tackle, he can get additional yardage. But, like, for the most part, I thought he did a really good job. Like, on the plays where he failed, it was a lot of Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence wrecking shop up front, right? There was a lot of that. Jalen Smith, which is kind of weird, I thought had a really good game just in terms of anticipating where Dalvin was going. Like, he didn't let Dalvin set him up at the second level and kind of, you know, use his choppy motion behind the line of scrimmage, use his eyes to set Jalen Smith up, and then hit the hole and go through it with the linebacker out of position. So, like, just with Dalvin, I wanted to touch on that real quick. Obviously, I don't think Dalvin was good in the passing game at all. Like, I think that was a pretty big problem where he had a drop, and obviously, like, the play where he got spun around by his jersey and then ended up tripping could have been a touchdown, and that ended up leading to a field goal, which, you know, could have made a pretty significant difference in the final outcome of the game. So, you know, I wouldn't say that Dalvin Cook, you know, played like an elite level running back or played up to the value of his contract. I don't think any running back can play up to the value of their contract, but I didn't think he had a terrible game like some people seem to be talking about.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there was a lot of. I wouldn't say Cook was the problem with those RYOE rushing yards over expected models is they're not actually watching film. They're just looking at the player tracking data and saying like, well, based on this angle and where this person is, you should be able to get this many yards. But like that's not one, that's not how it works in reality. And two, Alvin Cook makes his blockers look significantly better than they actually are because of how good he is with his vision and his footwork and setting up the linebackers and the other people at the second level and the third level to get into the wrong gap, to trick them. And he does this so often, tricking, you know, and that's why he's such a good zone running back, is because he's so good at setting up his own cutback lanes by getting linebackers to bite through the wrong hole. And you know what? You know, like this is what Saquon did on a lot of his own runs. Like Saquon set up a lot of his own runs by getting Cam Bynum to jump into the wrong gap, or getting Shannon Sullivan to jump into the wrong gap, and thereby get two guys in one gap and be able to sprint through. That's kind of what happened on that first Saquon touchdown.
Yeah.
Is, you know, he got Sullivan to bite inside and then was able to squeeze outside out on that pin pull run for a big rushing touchdown. And that's what Dalvin Cook does very well too. But like the models and the PFF grades will just say like, oh well, that was a great block by the offensive lineman. When it was like, well, yeah, I mean they did their job, but like it was the running back setting up those blocks. So I'm not sure the models, if we've done a good job yet disentangling those two things, because I think there's some covariance. They kind of move with each other in a way that you want your models to be independent and not, you know, you don't want two variables to be correlated with each other. It is interesting. I do think there's something to the idea with like there are runs that like a young Dalvin I think would have been able to break through the second level and pick up yards after, you know, that initial scrum, like whereas now that he gets kind of tripped up a little bit. And I do think Dalvin was never the most like you know, he wasn't like a stop on a dime type of player or like turn on a dime. He made himself look more agile than he was because with how good his footwork was. But I don't think like that type of athleticism was always his game. But I will say, I mean, he's not old yet, but I do feel like we didn't see the explosion that I'm used to seeing from Dalvin Cook this year. And that's even with like the 80+ yard screen touchdown and some of the other things. Like he clearly still has some juice, but like when you get reps in for you know, Chandler or Wangwu, I feel like those guys have a different level of explosion. And it is interesting kind of getting into like what do we do with Dalvin Cook this offseason. He's set to have a 14.1 million cap dollar hit. Only 6.2 million of that is guaranteed. So if they cut him, they could save almost $8 million. I do kind of feel like there's a very high chance, given the cap crunch, that Cook is not the running back on the team, and it will be interesting to see if they do move on from Cook. And Madison being a free agent, like what's the plan going forward there? Because as much as Cook may have like lost a step and drops passes in the passing game, he kind of always has. And the other kind of complaints you can have about Cook, he does so many things so fundamentally well as a rusher, particularly as a zone rusher, that I'm not sure you're ready to turn kind of the reins over to two very green running backs who are kind of more scat backs or special teamers than they are actual true running backs. So it'll be really interesting to see what the Vikings actually do at running back there. Because what Cook is really good, but he's not, no running back, maybe except for 2-3 are worth $14 million cap hits. But so just it all kind of ties into it's interesting, and it's also interesting thinking about like Vikings were a very good run blocking team, and PFF certainly thinks they were one of the best run blocking teams in the NFL. I'm not sure if I'd go that far, but like I feel like the rushing efficiency was disappointing this year, and I'm still trying to figure that. Like I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts about like why so many of the metrics love the Vikings offensive line, and they're everybody was a good run blocker. I feel like Bradbury, Darisaw, very good run blockers. Ingram had some really great run blocks as well. But like, why was the efficiency disappointing if you look at the individual performances? Like, was it just Dalvin, or do you think it was the scheme, or do you do you have an answer? Because now I'm still trying to figure out what went wrong there.
So I think there's probably a couple things. It might be a little bit of, in general, everybody's blocking really well, but a mixed bag of, you have a single player losing on a play that disrupts the play as opposed to multiple players losing on a play that disrupts the play, right? So if you have multiple players losing on the same play, you'll have one bad play and both of them will get bad grades for that bad play. But if you have a single player on two different plays, both of them still get bad grades, right? They end up with the same grade, but you have two failures as opposed to one failure and one success, right? If they do it well on the other play. So maybe there's a little bit of that variance going in there. That's a total random guess from me. The other thing is I think you kind of get what you put into in practice a little bit. So and the Vikings very much for the first time focused on being a pass first team the entire season, right? They were very pass happy. They love to throw the ball. They love to focus, and Justin Jefferson is the focal point, right? I think it's fair to say in previous seasons, Dalvin Cook and the running game was the focal point of the offense under Mike Zimmer. That's what he dictated, that they wanted to be the focal point of the running game, right? Here, it's getting Justin Jefferson the ball, and how much can we get Justin Jefferson the ball? So I think you end up getting a little bit of lazy with your run concepts, right? If you don't focus on it as heavily in the week of practice, right, when you're focusing on the passing plays and getting JJ the ball. And I think that's probably the primary driver to me. I don't have anything from like a granular level of of like, okay, the Vikings on this type of play, or like they ran a ton of inside zone, and inside zone's just generally a less efficient play than outside zone is. So because of that, like they had a less efficient run game overall. I don't know if that's true or what the details are on that, but I think focus would be the number one answer for me just off the top.
That's interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things change there next year. The other one that's interesting, and this kind of ties into maybe the last point in the game, is what they do at the center position with Garrett Bradbury being a free agent. He had a substantially improved year this year, but obviously struggled a lot. I mean, but you got to tip your cap to Dexter Lawrence, who's playing like maybe the best defensive tackle in the NFL after Aaron Donald. So do you want to talk at all about like what went wrong up front there?
I mean, I want to tip my cap to Dexter Lawrence, first of all. Like, I thought he played a phenomenal game, and he's a monster, right? He's 340 pounds or whatever, and he was quick and powerful, right? He had the quickness on top of the power, which is really hard to do at that size. But the Giants defensive line, you mentioned the stunning early on, like Ed Ingram, terrible on stunts still. Let Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence get to the quarterback multiple times off of stunts, where it's just like he gave up too much of an inside shoulder of a player coming from Bradbury, and Bradbury handled the player going the other direction. But because Ingram was caught off guard, the player kind of half-man relationship and went straight back to Kirk. I think that was Dexter Lawrence on one of the plays. Ezra Cleveland lost a bunch of reps too. Like, I don't want to say it was just Bradbury and Ingram. Ezra Cleveland probably lost 3 or 4. And I think, was he not the one who was responsible for that final pressure? Who was at least responsible for a couple of Dexter Lawrence's pressures on the final drive. And I also credit Lawrence. He really turned it up on the final 2 drives. 5 of the final Vikings plays, he completely decimated the interior offensive lineman, created a pressure for Kirk. Obviously, one of those he got called for the roughing the passer, which I guess his arm did hit Kirk Cousins' helmet, so that's probably a legit roughing the passer based on the rules. But it wasn't like it was a violent, hit or unnecessary or anything like that. It was just a little bit unfortunate for him on a otherwise really good rep. So I just wanted to credit Dalvin Tomlinson for his level of play, right? He was a disruptive force in the middle of the defense, and that's the opposite of what the Vikings had at defensive tackle. And I don't think, the defensive tackles played poorly. I thought the defensive tackles, first of all, played great in run defense when the Giants ran at them. The Giants only had success when they weren't running directly at our defensive tackles. But they just weren't able to get the pass rush push that we needed, and Dexter Lawrence provided that for the Giants, despite being probably bigger than either Dalvin Tomlinson or Harrison Phillips, right? So it was just a really impressive performance from him.
Yeah, crazy to have a 340-plus pounder guy turn it on in the fourth quarter. Not only play all the snaps, but also get even better as the game goes on. That's a crazy physical specimen. So well earned plot. It's good to see him getting some love out of this game. With that, I guess the question is, with Ed Donatel gone, where did the Vikings go from here? I know people are throwing out a lot of names. I know they really liked Sean Desai last year, who he's a Vic Fangio disciple. I think it was their linebackers coach maybe, but was now in a senior defensive assistant position in Seattle. And Seattle, their defense wasn't good this year, but it was expected to be among the worst, and it wound up actually being having multiple Rookie of the Year candidates and doing a lot of good things. So I feel if he was a finalist last year, he could be somebody who they want to get another look at. Aubrey Pleasant is another guy that Kevin O'Connell had a lot of glowing things to say about him. Said he'd be a future head coach someday. But then, interestingly, the Lions fired him in the middle of the season, and then their defense got a lot better after that. So that maybe makes his shine a little bit worse. I feel the choices, if they want to stick with a Fangio-style defense, are a little more limited because, one, that's what everybody's trying to do right now, and two, you're competing with everybody else for the same guys. So I would love Ejiro Evero out of Denver, but I feel he's either going to become a head coach or he's going to be the Broncos are not going to let him move unless the Broncos hire Sean Payton and Sean Payton hires Vic Fangio and Evero's the odd man out. That's the only circumstance I can see Evero. You would love to see Brandon Staley become available, but it doesn't seem like he's going to get fired in LA. And you would love to see Raheem Morris leave. There was a time when the Rams were rumored to be shaking things up and staff would be leaving or whatever. But then now that McVay's coming back and is not retiring or anything, hard to see Morris leave. So those are kind of pie in the sky guys. Is there any other names that you're kind of interested in now that Donatel's gone, or is it you haven't really thought about it because you literally just found out about this right before we hit the record button?
Yeah, I guess I don't have a great answer for this because I want to hire somebody who's a good defensive coordinator. That's what I care about, is hire somebody good. And I don't really care, if it's Fangio, Tree, or otherwise, because I think a defensive coordinator who is good will be able to turn the defense around in that first year and install his system pretty quickly. I think what we learned is that it wasn't necessarily growing pains for the Vikings defense. I think some of the players were executing their assignments just fine. It was the coaching overall for the Vikings defense that made a difference. Now, Sean Desai, I think, is pretty interesting because, like you said, the Seahawks brought him in to teach those cover four principles, those Fangio principles to their defense. They ran a lot more of that this year and were very successful. I don't think that's all Desai, right? And he was the Bears defensive coordinator. He ended up getting fired. But that's because Matt Nagy ended up getting fired, right? There was a head coach change, and the defense I don't think was perfect, but we've talked about how much of a pain that Bears defense was to play, even when we didn't think they had a ton of talent. So I don't think it's all on Desai there, the failures. Vance Joseph's a kind of interesting one. If he becomes available, obviously that would be a drastic shift. But he's a pretty respected person. He's kind of been up and down in Arizona, but also their talent acquisition is pretty poor, right? You spend first round picks on unique linebackers. I will say the concern I have, I guess, is they spent first round picks on unique linebackers, and he did not adapt to using them very quickly at all, right? It becomes super blitz happy. That's kind of an interesting mix up. Like you said, I think Raheem Morris would be the dream, or, coaxing Vic Fangio would be the dream. It sounds like there are a couple places that want him pretty badly, but, I throw the bag at Fangio if he wanted to come back. Like, I'd do what I can to get him in the building. Really. So, and I don't know why the Vikings would not be as interesting of a destination as like the Carolina Panthers or something if you're Vic Fangio, right? Like you say, look, you can have, control over the defense. Maybe it's the lack of cap space. Maybe he doesn't like the players as much. I don't know, but I don't think there's a reason we can't be competitive for some of these top tier defensive coordinators that head coaches coming in might want. But it's hard to say with the market what the Vikings will want to do. Unfortunately, after the Lions thing this year, like I was all in on Aubrey Pleasant as the defensive coordinator last year, and now just based on, he literally got fired, and the defense got so much better after he got fired. Like if there's not some sort of correlation there, I don't know what it is, right? So it's unfortunate. Like people talked really really highly of him last offseason, but it for whatever reason it didn't seem to work out there in Detroit. So I'm hoping we're able to add somebody, and that kind of makes me want to shy away from an up and comer, right? Because we don't know who's going to be good at the job until they actually get the job. So I'd rather have somebody who has a proven track record of success, which would lead me to, a literal Vic Fangio, Vance Joseph, or, someone like Ejiro Evero, who I thought did a great job this year, would be high on my target list if he's not able to get a head coaching job.
Yeah. One thing I will say is, two things I guess I'll say is I feel like Donatel was kind of brought in to be like the coverage guy. He was a DB's coach before he came. He was Fangio's DB's coach and kind of lieutenant. So there was we already had Mike Pettin in the building, and Mike Pettin brought with him Mike Smith from Green Bay and Chris Rump from Chicago. So we kind of had the fronts that we had in mind installed. And I'm guessing all those guys are going to stay. I can't guarantee, but like Mike Pettin's the assistant head coach. I highly doubt, and he's close with Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi, so I highly doubt Mike Pettin's going anywhere. And if Mike Pettin's staying, you have to imagine Mike Smith and Chris Rumpf are staying, not only because of their connections, but also because they were very good coaches this year. Like Chris Rumpf especially. Like Mike Smith, not to Mike Smith did a great job too. Like Zadarius Smith, finished the year second in pressures or whatever, and Daniil Hunter had a real bounce back year, comeback of the year type season from both of them. So they got a lot of pressure despite never blitzing. So I feel like Mike Smith did a great job, but Chris Rump basically Tonga's breakout, like Chris Rump special, like James Lynch, going from a guy who you're not sure belongs on an NFL roster, being consistently blowing up, popping up on the tape. Jonathan Bullard kind of emerging after some shaky years and injury concerns in the past. Dalvin Tomlinson being the MVP, basically Harrison Phillips. I kind of criticized the Vikings when they let Michael Pierce go and signed Harrison Phillips, because Phillips was a rotational one tech guy, and I was I'm not sure if he's ready to take on the snap count, and then he did it and he was great. So I feel like the front is kind of figured out already, and we just have to figure out the back seven a little bit. there's that, and there's also I feel like if there's a positive, if you're trying to sell this, is like nobody wants to be the guy that follows the guy. You want to be the guy that follows the guy that follows the guy. So nobody wanted to like follow up Mike Zimmer. Those are huge shoes to fill, and unfortunately, even for a defensive legend like Ed Donatel, who is a legend, all the defense that he was a coach of some phenomenal defenses in the past. So always painful when you let a guy go, but like now you can be the guy who takes over from Ed Donatel, whose defense was pretty disappointing, and expectations are certainly very different compared to having to follow up the Mike Zimmer. Who as bad as things ended on, with Mike Zimmer, like he was still scheming his butt off even up to the end. So maybe it's a little bit easier to not have to follow up that act this time around. So. And they do have some talent. It's not young talent, but Daniil Hunter, Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson if they bring him back. Harrison Phillips is a good player. Harrison Smith is still back there. Patrick Peterson if they re-sign him. A lot of these guys are old, but also first round or early second round picks coming up and coming. Brian Asamoah up and coming. Caleb Evans. So it'll be there is some talent I think to work with there. So will be interesting to see which direction they go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hesitate to say there's nowhere to go but up, right? Because I think people have said that for the past 2 seasons, and it has not gotten better. But it really feels like a change here could trend this defense in a pretty positive direction. So with that all being said, quick programming note here. For the offseason, there will be a point where we kind of fall back and don't record as much as we get to the doldrums of the offseason. But before we get to that point, I think we're going to record weekly here. We've got a lot of stuff to go over, including, the impending free agents on the Vikings. Obviously, now we're going to have to figure out maybe learn an entirely new defense for another year for the second time in 2 years. So it could be interesting, some interesting content if we get a new defensive coordinator that's from a different tree. And we'll monitor that situation going forward. So we also want to do kind of an off-season review or a review of the season, kind of give awards to all the players on the team. So look for that content coming forward probably every week. I don't know quite how regular our schedule is going to be. With all that being said, I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He is Nick Olson. You can find him at Nick Olson NFL. Our co-host Greg Blake is at You've Been Gregged. We are Kindred Skulls. You can find us at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. We're available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube as well. Give us those 5-star reviews. And with that, Skull Vikings.
Skull, another first-round corner wouldn't do us any wrong. Just saying. Cool, baby.
Another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score